the types of voters that the Democrats would win if they were taking Brianna's advice are probably exactly the types that people would be least likely to expect. I say that as somebody from Kansas, where is a very populist state. In fact, it was the birth of the populist movement.
Yeah, we just had Thomas Frank on Useful Idiots. It's coming out soon, but yeah.
He was at my law office 2 weeks ago having coffee with me, actually. But anyway, the very voters that actually we can win with, for instance, economic populist ideas are the ones that voted very fervently for Donald Trump. Frankly, a lot of them voted for Obama and then Trump. A lot of them maybe didn't even vote for Obama and voted for Trump. But if they have one candidate who agrees with them on the social issues and another candidate who doesn't agree, who doesn't really stand for anything, they're going to every time go to the one with the social issues. But if you give them an alternative of somebody that agrees with them on their pocketbook, especially right now during a recession that's headed to a depression, we can absolutely win those voters. And it's not, it's not. The idea of the swing voter completely changes, because are we going to win a bunch of like corporate Republicans, maybe a few of whom crossed over to vote for Hillary that way? No, maybe we'll even lose some of their votes, but we'll win. There's so many, overwhelmingly more of the populist voters than there are of the 1% voters that we can get and attract if we, were to take her advice.
Yeah. And what's so frustrating is I think a lot about this and why it is that there's this misunderstanding about what it means to get a swing voter. And there's this expectation that if you are attractive to a certain kind of white working class voter, that it must be because you are throwing the Democratic base under the bus, as it were.
Women, people of color, LGBTQ people, right? That's the narrative. Yeah.
Exactly. And I understand why that narrative exists, because historically that has been the way that a certain kind of white voter has been solicited. But that kind of voter isn't the voter. What is happening is that corporate Democrats are willing to concede to cuts in Social Security, are willing to downplay a whole host of social issues that are enormously important to historically marginalized groups in order to go after an affluent white moderate voter, the voter that Chuck Schumer famously said in 2016 we're going to get in Connecticut or what have you. But on the other hand, when you're reaching out for voters who have an overwhelming overlap of interests with historically marginalized voters, because so many of the ways that historical discrimination is manifest is through these economic ways, right? And the inability to stay housed and afford rent, and inability to access social programs, and all of these healthcare. When you're able to attract people by actually reaching for those material goals, you don't have to start throwing anybody in the bus. You actually just have to fulfill what the original promise that the Democratic Party was supposed to be, which is to be this party of labor and this party of the people. But I do want to acknowledge that there are I think reasonable historical reasons why a lot of Democrats are skeptical and frustrated by this idea that we can reach out to this working class white voter, because for so long that rhetoric has been a dog whistle. But we cannot allow those bad actors to strip away our ability to talk about working class voters who are in fact overwhelmingly female and non-white, right? We can't allow them to appropriate that language and then inhibit our ability to speak to the base that is in fact the base, this beautiful working class, diverse working class base that is in fact additionally comprised of white working class Americans. And we can't, the Field Sisters talk a lot about this in Racecraft, and this idea that we are helping to reify these racial this kind of racialized balkanization along political lines by talking about Trump as a president for white people, and then talking about Democrats as the candidates for people of color, without kind of acknowledging the larger amount of nuance there, and saying Trump is the candidate for affluent people who are overwhelmingly white, and Democrats should be the party for working class people who are disproportionately non-white, but also do a lot of good for any white voters who are feeling understandably neglected by the Republican Party.
And I think I was the first one to introduce the topic of a swing voter in this conversation. But, I would be remiss to not point out that there are, 100 million people that did not vote in the last presidential election. And I guarantee you, by definition, most of them are not in the 1%. Almost all of them are in the 99%, right? And there are so exorbitantly many more of these non-voters than there are any amount of swing voters. And also often they are in the classes of people that feel, for good reason, because they're absolutely right, that they have absolutely no voice whatsoever. And if we were even just the party that just made them feel like they had a voice, or felt like, or made them feel like they could trust anything that our leaders have to say whatsoever, I feel like they would flock to support our candidates, even if they disagreed with us on various issues or not. That's by far the key to success, I think, as well.
Yeah. To that point, when I was a reporter at The Intercept covering your race, Brent, and traveling to Kansas and other places in the States for the 2018 primary season, what I found in casual conversation with people when I explained why I was there, who I was covering, I'm heading to a Bernie rally, was a lot of receptivity to Bernie, not because of any particular policy position per se, but the knowledge that he's someone who didn't take corporate money. And while at times when you bring up the negative influence of PAC money, et cetera, in a political context, what you get from a lot of these commentators is this kind of, oh gosh, oh shucks, are you saying that these people are bought? Like, how dare you? That's just an incredible thing to wrap your mind around. Like, are you really saying this about our beloved national figures like Nancy Pelosi or what have you? And it's like, well, if you want to talk about systemic issues and in the way that is such a buzzword right now, you have to be willing to talk about the systemic influence of money in politics. And what's so funny is that while it's so hard to get that message across in certain kind of corporate popular media circles, when you're talking to average people, corruption is as intuitive as weather patterns. Right. and in an agricultural state, it really isn't a hard sell, and it's something that for, I think, a lot of voters who don't have the time to be on Twitter all day the way we are, God bless them, people who aren't necessarily able to stay on top of every discrete issue, you can have a certain amount of confidence in a candidate if you know that they're beholden only to people and to the voters, and that's where they're getting their money. And it really is frustrating to me sometimes how much Democrats undervalue that as a selling point. And it's something that I think could go a long way for Joe Biden to re-earn the trust of voters, because I think even if he were to represent, that he is open to a number of these policies that kind of the Bernie camp is continuing to push. There's some skepticism that he would follow through, because what are you going to do when one of your senior aides is a former healthcare lobbyist? How much should we trust those commitments? I think it would go a long way for him to not re-sign up a bunch of those Obama-era people, to reject a lot of these people who've gone through the revolving door, to pledge not to take money from the fossil fuel industry, et cetera, to reject the fact, all of the billionaire money. He has more billionaire donors than anybody else in the race. I think that more than any discrete policy position would do a lot to earn the trust of voters, because I think there's a belief that the rest would come naturally when he wasn't so constrained by the pocketbook.
He also doesn't have a great record of being honest. If we're being honest,